Hello, BookTube. I thought we'd do another installment of an intermittent series on this channel, Last Week in BookTube, where I look back at my viewing on YouTube over the last few days, uh, comment on a few videos, and maybe share with you thereby something that you didn't know about that you might find interesting. Uh, Not at all comprehensive. I watch a lot of YouTube, so I couldn't possibly do a comprehensive overview of everything that I saw, but just highlights, maybe lowlights. I don't think there are any lowlights this time around. With concentric circles, so we can start with YouTube in general. Then we can move to more or less BookTube adjacent, and then to BookTube proper. So the YouTube in general might not be of much interest to you. It might just reflect my own areas of interest at the moment, or things that just struck me. You never know, might still be of interest to you. Like, for instance, there is an atheist apologetics channel called Prophet of Zod. Channels that sprung up in the wake of New Atheism that disassemble theistic arguments or attack Christian overreach. Uh, these channels are not going to exist in a year anywhere. So I watch the ones that I like religiously, no pun intended. Prophet of Zod is an interesting one because for a long time on his channel, he did an animatronic TV static head for himself. Didn't want to put his face on camera. Uh, that turned out, in retrospect, to have been a very, very good idea, but nevertheless, it bothered me. That, and also in those early videos, it always struck me that he was the worst possible reader of his own scripts, that his channel was certainly bringing in enough money at that point to hire someone to read his scripts. You could basically hire a high school student to do a better job, a less rushed job, a less mushy, hurried, tripping over your own feet kind of job. And then recently he changed his videos so that he shows his face. A very pleasant face, a very welcoming, friendly face. And I don't know if seeing his own face on camera changed his cadence, as it can do. Hearing your own voice and seeing yourself on camera can do that. I don't know what the change was, but suddenly most of those script reading problems were gone as well. So I now watch his channel all the time. He did a recent video about the subject of objective morality. Uh, and I I watched it and I really enjoyed it. And if you were going, I'll leave a link to everything that I mentioned down below. And if you're going to watch it, I would urge you to have a little patience because he is cutting and pasting. He's clipping and referring to two other YouTubers, two other uh, YouTubers who have made a career of bashing organized religion. And those two YouTubers, one of them is Alex O'Connor, whose name might be known to you. They are young, and so, especially the videos that he clips are from years and years ago. So they're absolutely in love with what my generation referred to as logic chopping. Uh, they're in love with the whole idea of the rules of logic and the terms of formal logic. It's incredibly tedious. There are only a couple of these figures that still hold, that are still in love with that, even though they're old enough to know better. Uh, and so for the beginning of Prophet of Zod's video, you're going to have to wade through a lot of logic chopping. And the reason that I would suggest that you do wade through it and watch to the end is that Prophet of Zod turns out to be every bit as irritated with logic chopping, especially on questions of morality, as you are. So it ends up being worth it, I think. You can judge for yourself. And then the other YouTube thing is another earthquake that is going through the evangelical sphere on YouTube. Right now, the evangelical sphere on YouTube is not, in fact, all of YouTube. Instead, it's its own separate thing. It's not GodTube, but it's a flourishing community. Lots and lots of voices, and there has been a scandal in in the religious community there, involving someone named Stephen Lawson. Very, very popular figure. I know some of you will know that name. Written a lot of books, done a lot of seminars, influenced a lot of people, influenced the planting and direction of a lot of churches, and who has relatively recently been the subject of a scandal. He has been the subject of an adultery scandal. He is an adulterer. And this follows on the heels of another massive mega church pastor, Robert Morris, also being the subject of a scandal of having had sexual relations with a 12-year-old against her will, and obviously against her will and without her knowledge, really, of what was going on until it was over. He stole the innocence of a child. These things are rocking the evangelical community, and the channel that I will link to down below is IBNW News. They're pretty good, but if you're interested in the subject, this or Robert Morris, just go to YouTube and type in their names, and you'll get dozens and dozens and dozens of videos and breakdowns of every possible angle imaginable, except one angle that I have not been able to find, which is anyone defending them. The Christian communities that I see reflected on YouTube not only condemn both men, but also, very interestingly, started with Robert Morris, and it is in full flower with Stephen Lawson, also take a lesson away from these scandals. Because the scandals in themselves are not, they are literally as old as time. Men falling into sexual temptation is as old as time. And the commentators know that, and so a lot of them feel behooved to come up with something deeper to say about it. And the angle that they're all taking, I think it's fascinating. It's actually very similar to the angle taken by what I think anybody would have to view as the fall of the former all-natural fitness influencer Alex Eubank. 24 years old, multimillionaire, roasting tobacco addict, fan-rogering, golden-haired, beach guy that has millions and millions of followers, and recently decided, and made an open video about it, that he was going to start taking drugs to enhance his physique. Even did a video where he opened a package of getting his first shipment of drugs in the mail, talked about it, oohed and awed about it. Well, if any insecure 18-year-old male weightlifter out there who was maybe thinking, my favorite guy, Alex Eubank, decided to start shooting up drugs, but I don't know that I want to. Any insecure 17-year-olds out there who felt that way when he first announced it definitely stopped feeling that way when he did an awestruck kid in a candy store video about opening his new drugs. He has made an entire generation of drug addicts and will be proximately responsible for who knows how many deaths. And in the wake of his scandal, I think you can call that a scandal. It's true, it's legal. It's true, it's doctor supervised, but it's still a scandal. And in the wake of that scandal, a lot of fitness commentators have been saying, not so much, isn't it terrible that he did this? They are saying that, but rather, isn't it terrible that we idolize people? And that same reaction is happening with Stephen Lawson, isn't it? It's not just this man cheated on his wife with a girl young enough to be his granddaughter. It's, do we want celebrity pastors, celebrity preachers? Do we want them at all? Aren't they inherently bad for the religious community? I find that angle fascinating. I don't know if any of this will be of interest to you, but then we can move on to BookTube-adjacent, and here I mean channels that more or less, or videos that are more or less about books or reading or writing, but that don't fly under the BookTube flag. They don't consider themselves BookTube channels, I don't think. I know for sure some of them don't. For instance, if we're going to segue from Stephen Lawson from the subject of Christianity online, we could go to Tim Nichols. Tim Nichols does a channel called NickelsWorth Bible Reviews. Very quick Bible reviews where he shows you some item. There are a few really good Bible review channels online, but his is the quickest and the most accessible. And in the video that I'm linking to down below, he does not actually review a Bible this time around. He does a book review of Tim Wildsmith's Bible Translations for Everyone, where Tim Wildsmith goes through all the different Bible translations. What are you looking for? What must you worry about? What is different here that may be doctrinally important to you? Here's the overview. It's hard to get one of those things very clearly. Wildsmith does a really good job. I read an advanced copy of his book, and Tim Nichols does a really good job of reviewing it. I remember once, years and years ago, I worked in a retail bookstore, and in the Bible section, we had a little plastic shelf talker, a little sign, a hanging sign on the shelf. It was laminated and it had multiple pages of just this. What are the differences between the Bibles? And that thing got beaten up like crazy. It was referenced a lot. And Wildsmith's book is a lot like that. So I recommend NickelsWorth Bible reviews anyway, especially if you are a believing Christian and you want to know what are the new Bibles like, what are the features in them. Then the next channel is not BookTube, it's minimalism. It's Nicholas Garofola. I've recommended him before. He has a really calming, welcoming channel. And he does his recent video on minimalist tips from minimalist living. Ideas to do, not a question of dumping stuff, but rather, I guess, philosophical tenets that you could do, or rather life hacks, or neither one of those terms really do it justice, but tips for living simply. And the reason I include this video is because one of his tips is to read fiction. And he mentions in that video that if you are out of the habit of reading, and it feels like an uphill battle to get it back, try it. A good book will hook you and do most of the work. I think he's right about that. And then another channel is Dr. Tarek Elgawhary. I'm not 100% sure how to say his name. Dr. Tarek. I'm not 100% sure how to say his last name, but I would firmly nominate him for the most beautiful library background behind him. Astonishing. And he does a recent video of his is about reading the works of Shakespeare. And it's fascinating. Any video like that would be fascinating. Anybody's journey through Shakespeare would be fascinating. I wonder how many of the points and experiences that he has in that video will be common to you in your own Shakespeare reading experience. Certainly when he holds up cheap paperback Dover editions of individual Shakespeare plays, that will ring a bell with a lot of you, I'd be willing to bet. Because his video is a good reminder, to me anyway, that a lot of people do not have access to a fantastic, constantly overturning used bookstore. Most people don't have access to that, so they're at the mercy of what they can find in the used bookstore. To build a Shakespeare library, for instance, or any other library, but his thoughts on reading Shakespeare, the whole works of Shakespeare, are fascinating. So, and then the last BookTube-adjacent thing is about writing. It's 58 Keys, the William Gallagher's channel, 58 Keys, the 58 Keys writing workshop in specific, where he goes into his shed to talk about writing, not just writing on Apple tech, but writing just in general. And he did an extra episode on writing in tough times that is really, really eloquent. Low key, I'm sure that he would wince at me using a word like that, but it is true. It's a quiet and eloquent, comforting little video about writing, about just put the words in front of each other, and also about something that I have talked about writing many times. He has talked about it many times, which is that writing can be a refuge. It can be its own little kingdom. If you're writing fiction, after the initial rock pushing, after the initial start where you're putting your furniture in place and you're heaving the whole thing into motion, once it's in any kind of motion, it is a world that you can move into when you're writing and just close the door behind you. And that is an amazing feeling. That's an amazing feeling in good times, much less in tough times. William Gallagher is entirely right about that. And if you have a writing project that you have let stall, might be a good time to pick it back up again. So that is BookTube-adjacent, and then we can move on to BookTube itself. And here, the list of videos could be very, very long. I'm going to give you just a tiny list of things that I saw that I thought were very interesting that I can, in one way or another, recommend. Like, for instance, Tilly's Shelf did a video about Little Dorritt by Charles Dickens. Really, really good, as you'd expect, but still really, really good. A wonderful, quick video introduction and overview to Little Dorritt, but also full of fascinating insights. Then probably the video on YouTube on BookTube that has made me the happiest in the last few days. Sarah at the Bookish Knitter did a reading update and a health update, which doesn't sound like much until you realize that Sarah just recently, just a month ago, went through an unbelievable operation, a heart transplant. We say these terms, we toss them off so easily, but it's an incredible, incredible experience. So to have her back home reeling off the things that she's read and is planning on reading was wonderful, absolutely wonderful. And also at one point in that video, she gives a medical update, and she makes sure to give you a sign that for the medically squeamish so that they don't have to listen to it. But part of her medical update is something you should all listen to, which is make donor arrangements. Make organ donation arrangements. Make them and make them known to somebody else, to somebody other than yourself. It's really, really important. There are people whose lives depend on it. Sarah gets emotional when she makes that plea, and I agree completely. It's an emotional plea. Definitely take an hour to get that in order in your own life. And then if we're talking about BookTube, of course we have to talk about Jack Edwards, the demon smurf of BookTube, who caught my attention. He actually made a Last Week in BookTube months and months and months ago, because he organized his personal library. He had a room at the top of the stairs that he was going to make into a library, a dedicated space for a library. And he took readers along, got bookshelves, was going to organize that space, put all the books on the floor, and then put them up on the shelves. I thought it made incredibly charming viewing. I have my issues with Jack Edwards, obviously, but I don't think that video was faked. I don't think any of it was feigned. And recently he has moved. He keeps saying in his videos that he moved across country, which automatically makes me just staggered until I realize that England is about as long as my living room. So moving across country is, what was it, 100 miles? You poor thing. Something like that. His country is as wide as New England and would fit comfortably 100 times into the state of Texas. So I'm not undercutting the effort. Moving a library is a horrific effort at any point, anywhere, even if you move it, I don't know, from one floor in a building to another. It's still a back-breaking effort. He moved his library, which I think he said is around 1,500 books, and he created a new room. He didn't just move it to chaos or put it in boxes in the basement or something like that. He moved it to a new room, a new dedicated little book room. This little book room of his is a nice, neat space, illuminated as far as I can tell by a couple of windows, maybe one window. It has a bed, it has a chair, it has his books. So he set up all the bookshelves and then put all the books on the floors. He went at it in a very systematic way. You'll see if you watch the video. He put actual category section stickers on the empty shelves. I can't imagine being that organized, but it was fascinating to watch. Just fascinating to watch. So I am unironically recommending a Jack Edwards video. Then a channel called Willow Talks Books. Willow goes at the Neil Gaiman scandal. They're doing a lot of scandals this time around. This one is older. Shockwaves are still emanating in the book world. Neil Gaiman, as far as I know, has not been criminally charged with anything, but the evidence against him is damning and irrefutable. And Willow talks about how this affects her personally, what to think about it, what happens when an author you previously loved turns out to be or becomes a monster, or someone you can no longer in any way ethically support. I thought it was a really good balance of looking at the facts of the case and also looking at what Willow's own moral imperatives are, but also what about yours? What are your moral imperatives? I don't think that you can ever quite get enough of talking about these subjects. I think they're really, really interesting. What urgent, pressing morality governs your own personal library? Some of you, I'm sure, will say that morality shouldn't do that. But I don't know. Willow convinced me. If you can stand to hear one more video about Neil Gaiman, until we have more details on the subject, I thought that case was over. But Willow Talks Books was fascinating anyway. Then we have Spread Bookjoy, who did a video on her Victorian literature journey, her own personal experience with Victorian literature, how it grew, where it started, what elements have always been of most interest, what elements are new and are growing in interest. I love XY journey videos anyway. I always find them fascinating. If the people who make those videos were here in this room for wine and calzones, those are exactly the kinds of questions I would ask. And my interest would be completely genuine. How did this start for you? What shape did this take? How does it feel as it goes on? I find those things fascinating. And of course, when it comes to videos like that about the Victorians are even more interesting. Because of how great the Victorians are and how they get their tendrils into everything. Then another BookTube, we'll finish up here. Another BookTube video would be Shawn Standfast, who did a video, a really fascinating thing about science fiction reference works, various science fiction encyclopedias and dictionaries and whatnot. That was fascinating. Glimpses of his bookshelves are always fascinating anyway. But when you've got someone like Shawn or Stephen Andrews, the outlaw bookseller, or a few other people who do a video like this, you don't just get the pleasure of sampling their bookshelves. You also get a door open to their personal experience, their vast reading experience. That's always a lot of fun, always interesting. And then we can finish up last week in BookTube, I guess, and also the BookTube section with Michael K Vaughan, who did a video. I'll link to all of these down below. He did a video on reading cheaply, on what do you do if you're reading on a budget. And when I started the video, I thought, well, what directions is he going to take this in? I'm curious to know. And I made a prediction. When I started watching the video, I thought, I know what I would say here. And within a minute, right away in his video, he does exactly what I would have done, which is to hold up an electronic e-reader, any kind of electronic e-reader, whatever it is, whether it's a little black and white Kindle, an old Kindle, whether it's a color. I've got a color Kindle right here. Whatever it is, an iPad, a Kobo, whatever it is. He makes the self-evident point that if you want to read on a budget, you must read ebooks. It feels to me like that point is being stressed mainly for what I'm hoping is a shrinking minority of people who just refuse to read ebooks. But nevertheless, if you refuse to do that, all right, then you've taken your financial obligations on yourself willingly. But if you want to read on a budget, then the expense you need to undergo is an e-reader. Michael K Vaughan points out in his video, and I wholeheartedly second it, that the secondhand market, you can get a perfectly working, unscratched, untouched, like new, older generation Kindle for $40, which is still not a small amount of money, but nevertheless, it's the cost of one printed book. And as Michael points out in his video, it'll pay for itself in no time at all. You get that device, and then at the very least, even if you don't look around anywhere else, you have something like Project Gutenberg, which is full of great books, tens of thousands of great books, all of which are free, and all of which you can download to your Kindle. But there are a dozen other sites like that have books that have fallen out of copyright that are free. There's no equivalent like that. Even your public library is not equivalent to that because A, it won't have that kind of reach, and B, you have to return them. Whereas with these free common domain classics of one kind or another, they're yours. You could fill an e-reader. If you get an older Kindle, let's say 8 gigs of storage, something like that, you could literally fill that device so that it doesn't have any more room for ebooks. You could literally fill that device from Project Gutenberg. Get a non-Kindle, a device where you can expand the memory. You could go all the way up to 15,000 books, more than you'll ever read. And that's just one site. And there are all kinds of, I've mentioned email, ebook clearinghouse things. You give them your email and they send you links that day to ebook deals. There are plenty of those that concentrate just on free books. Again, that's 3 or 4 books a day that you could get. Most of them won't be good. Maybe most of them won't be of interest to you, but some of them will be. And that's without buying anything. That's without spending any money at all, except the money that you spent on your Kindle. And your Kindle doesn't have to be new. They all work. They're workhorse devices. Michael makes a key point, I think, shoring up his point about e-readers, which is that the format of a book does not matter. To the reading of the book, it does not matter. Maybe to your aesthetic enjoyment, you want a nice, pretty folio edition on the shelf, but the format doesn't matter for the actual reading of the book. Once upon a time, I might have quibbled with that before I experienced e-reading. I might have quibbled with that. I knew about e-reading before I tried it, for a long time before I tried it. And then I did try it, and the world fell away. During the reading experience, the world fell away the same way it does with a print and paper book. So there's that. There's also the library. Your libraries are more and more defunded. It's been my experience. I've been talking with a lot of people in the last few years who've tried to get, ever since COVID really, who've tried to get back into the habit of their library. They remember it from when they were kids, only to find that their library system, not just the individual building, but the whole system, is really bad, mostly denuded of interesting content, and with very limited supplies of the interesting stuff. That's pretty depressing, but I bet that's more the rule than the exception. So if you have a good library system, be grateful for it. I think all the time when this subject comes up of what would happen if I were totally reliant and only reliant on the Boston Public Library system. You'd think Boston, lots and lots of libraries, lots and lots of money in that system, even after draconian cuts from 30 years ago. And also Boston being the home of American literacy, you'd think surely that system is really good. It's not particularly good. For the kind of stuff that a practiced reader, the kind of taste that a practiced reader develops, not really. It'll do, but I know there's some library systems that are much better than that, but if you acclimate yourself to e-reading, well, that drastically expands the capacities of your library because you now have access to their ebook collection as well. But also, it opens the whole world to free ebooks that are out there, free and cheap. As Michael points out, even if you're not dealing with self-published stuff, which is what you'll get in those ebook daily deal videos or websites, or out of copyright stuff, so older than 75 years, like on sites like Project Gutenberg, even if you don't want to do that, even if you want to shop in the main retail waters, often the ebook will be the least expensive option of any book. It's true, the precautions that you've heard about, you don't own the book. If you buy it, you're paying to lease it and whatnot. I'm sure that you've seen videos cautioning you about that, but you've probably also seen videos about people walking you through ways to eliminate that problem, to remove the digital rights management of a file so that it is yours. There are websites, very popular ones, that will do that. So I guess the upshot of Michael's video, certainly an upshot that I want to second, is that there's a huge amount of ways to shop, to read cheap. There are a huge amount of ways to do that, but most of them depend on you adopting e-reading, which it might, if you've never tried it and you've made it into this horrible line in the sand bugaboo, you might want to reconsider that. It's actually really enjoyable to do. And you can't possibly say that everyone who is telling you that is not a real reader. There are plenty of real readers who say that. But anyway, it was a fascinating video, reading on the cheap. I wonder what kind of strategies you have that maybe Michael didn't mention. Maybe I'm not thinking of them. Feel free to sound off in my comment section or his. But definitely check out all of these videos. I will leave them all linked down below. So that's a Friday Reads for November 11th. And I will wrap this up for now. But I'll see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.